is the most statistically unlikely thing that has ever happened to you? Story 1. Lost my ATM card, went to the bank to have it replaced, told them what I wanted the PIN to be, and they told me that the PIN would be randomly assigned and mailed separately, and once I received both I could then change the PIN to what I wanted it to be. The randomly assigned PIN was the one that I wanted. Story 2. I went to a trade show, and a lot of the companies had bowls with drop in your business card to win. At the end of the day they gathered us all together to draw the prizes, and I won a laptop, an iPhone, a weekend in a resort, a year subscription to MSDN and a carton of wine. After the first 2 wins people thought it was funny. Then there was playful teasing, but for the last couple I just got booed and people groaned a lot. A few people called out rigged etc., but as the announcer explained it was multiple bowls from multiple companies, all brimming with business cards. Totally freaked me out, felt like the Twilight Zone. Story 3. Went to the store to buy a scratcher and cigarettes, old lady and her grandkid in front of me in the line. Kid can't decide which candy he wants so the lady tells me to go before them. Kid decides on a candy just as I accepted the kind gesture, so I quickly decline and let them take their original spot in the line because I'm not a. She buys same scratch ticket as I was gonna buy. I buy my stuff and as I'm walking out they both start screaming and cheering like crazy. I ask sup, turns out they won 10K, and no I didn't win on my scratcher. Story 4. In French, I went South Korea on an island where no one or barely speak English. I forgot a small bag in the bus while going from north to south of the island 1h30 of bus ride. This bag contained my passport, credit cards, driver license, cash around 600 the same in Korean won and my flights tickets to go back to Seoul, and later to Japan. I was in complete panic and already envisioning calling the embassy to have them pick me up and send me back to France as I couldn't find a single employee or local understanding any English. Out of nowhere, a 51 Korean lady in her early 50s patted my shoulder and introduced herself in clear and perfect French. Hello, I'm a fluent French speaker, am married to a French-Canadian guy since 20 years. It seems you are in trouble, maybe I can help. She stayed with me, listened to my stories, rushed to a 711 to borrow their phone, called the bus company, called the police, explained the situation. I ended up in the local police station where I stayed for 3 hours. One police Korean lady were giving me thumbs up saying all okay, fine, no worry and smiling at me. I was still in complete stress. Then out of nowhere came a bus. The driver left the vehicle, walked toward the police station with a small black bag. My bag, it was containing everything from papers to money. After the Korean lady called the bus company and the police, they actually managed to identify the bus I was in based on hours I arrived, located my bag, then exchanged it from bus to bus until it was in the hand of a driver coming to my destination. After check, the police brought me back to my hostel. Later that day I found the old lady which gave me her number and I invited her to a restaurant to thank her. She giggled calling herself my guardian angel. She now lives in Australia and we speak approximately every 6 months. She still says she's my guardian angel. It was 4 years ago and I still think finding a French-speaking 50-years-old native Koryo lady in the context that was mine TLDR in desperate need of a translator the most statistically unlikely event that happened to me. Story 5. When I was 8 or 9 years old, I was playing in my front yard. It was overcast and I felt a raindrop hit my arm, so I held my hand out with my palm up towards the air, to catch a raindrop, landed directly in my hand. I wasn't standing under any trees. Years later as a teenager, I'm telling this story to my stepbrother, and we're outside playing basketball. As I'm telling the story to him, I show him the act of holding my arm out, palm up, hit my hand again. In other news, my stepbrother thinks I'm the shittiest magician ever. Someone with multiple felonies has my same birthday to the year and first, middle and last name as well as the same eye color and height in my state. It makes all background checks a big pain as well as renewing any official documents like my driver's license. Story 6. I found a pair of sunglasses, unisex sunglasses in perfect condition on the beach in the water, stepped on it, thought it was a stick, took it out of the water, was pleasantly surprised. A week later I met with some friends. One of them told me she had the same sunglasses but lost them a week ago on a beach. Apparently they were searching for it for half an hour. I gave it back, got a beer for it. Edit: I live nowhere near water. It was a random beach on the shore of a random river. Story 7. I was reading a Reddit thread about weird places in the world or something and someone posted a link to a location on Google Maps using the latitude and longitude coordinates. Just out of dumb curiosity, I replaced them with a bunch of random numbers just to see where in the world I would wind up, figuring I'd probably land in the ocean. It took me to a spot in my city, less than 2 blocks away from where I was sitting. I went from flabbergasted to annoyed that no one else was there to witness it, because it was so astoundingly unlikely and weird, and there's no way I'll ever be able to prove that it happened. Story 8. So I have seen on Reddit a number of times about the likelihood of there being 2 people in any given room who share a birthday, but this one still gets me years after it happened. I was traveling for work and ended up nearly halfway around the world. As I arrive, I am greeted by my host for the week. We get to talking and he tells me he was looking forward to this because when he was first told about it, he noticed we have the same initials, drastically different names, but the same initials. We talk further and find out we also have the same birthday, different years. We get to the job site and go to meet the project manager. After talking business for a bit, we mention the conversation we had earlier about sharing a birthday. He asks what it is and we tell him. He smiles and then proceeds to take out his ID and show it to us. He also has the same birthday. So three people from different places on the planet all meet together on a project on the same day and share the same birthday. Edit, it's in April for those of you keen to guessing. Story 9. When I was 16, I stole a knife from an Apache helicopter that landed at my school, got caught, knife returned to the school later in the day, never got the chance to apologize to the pilots. It's the only time I ever stole something and I've never stopped feeling bad about it. I would often wish I could find the pilots to apologize. 6 years ago I was 32 at the time I was interviewing for a new job. Got the job because one guy who I'd be working with took a liking to me and went to bat for me with my future boss. Ended up getting the job. 3 months later I found out the guy who went to bat for me was one of the pilots I stole the knife from. He didn't know who I was, but I finally got the chance to apologize. When I apologized he told me the other pilot that was on the Apache that day 16 years previous also worked for the same company now, so I got to apologize to him too. Sometimes real life doesn't seem like real life. Story 10. I was in a car that was rear-ended by a bus, pushed out into an intersection against the light, where we were broadside by another bus. I walked away from it with only a small piece of glass under my scalp but was otherwise fine. Story 11 months ago I was on the bus, and I was looking over someone's shoulder and saw them on their smartphone browsing Reddit. They were looking at a post that I made on Canada. I told them that I was the person who submitted that post, and they seemed unconvinced or unimpressed. I logged in on my phone to show them it was my username, but they still didn't see the comedic coincidence. It was rather unsatisfying to me that they weren't equally amused by the connection. Story 12. I got on by a while walking out to the car to meet a woman for lunch. I ran inside and put on a clean shirt, drove to the restaurant, and was on by another while walking in. I was so flabbergasted that it was difficult to be angry. Story 13. I'm 28 and have never been called for jury duty. One day last September this fact was pointed out to me while at work. When I got home, my notice to appear was in the mail. Story 14. I cut a fly in half mid-air with a pair of scissors. It was bugging me so I jokingly snipped at it without looking. I saw two halves drop out of the corner of my eye, and I was like, oh, I actually felt awful about it, so I couldn't even fully appreciate the accidental badassery. Edit HAH bugging. Story 15. Went from a middle-of-nowhere public school in one state to a very small 200 students college prep program in another state. A girl in my class there was from South America and friends with my roommate. She was always around. I had a huge crush on her for the entire 2 years, but was too clueless to do anything about it. After 2 years we graduated. I went to college in a pretty large city in the US. She went back to college in her home country. 2 years later, I get a phone call. Her family had moved to that same city 2 months prior. She had found a school newsletter the week prior that was packed up with her stuff, and had found out we were in the same city. We've been married for about 20 years now. Story 16. At 22 years old I was driving home from a party in my buddy's truck. My buddy was in the passenger seat because he was knocked out drunk. He had been puking out the window the whole way home, and I would later find out the side of the truck was covered in his vomit. Sitting between us was his date, who I had never met before, and would find out the next day was only 19. She and I were also intoxicated, and all three of us had been smoking weed. By the way, I do not condone any of this behavior. I would never even think of drink driving now, but I was a stupid selfish kid. About 500 meters before we got to my house we stumbled into a 12-car police checkpoint. As we pulled up to be checked out I was mentally preparing myself to be arrested and have my whole life. The officer started asking me questions about what we were doing, and I explained that I was driving my friend home from a party in the city 60 miles away. He asked if we had far to go, and I explained that I lived just around the corner. He gave me a long look up and down, then leaned in and said, "You drive real safe," and then waved us through. That never should have happened, and my life should be markedly different because of it, but I got lucky, and I learned my lesson. If there's no way to get home safe, I don't drink, or I DD for others. Don't drink and drive, kids. Story 17. Stood about 8 feet away from my buddy when he was hit by lightning, and I was not sure if this counts as the getting hit by lightning thing would be the statistical anomaly, but to be that close and not be hit. Story 18. I did marketing work for a golf tournament hosted by my company. This was back in the 80s. On the day of the tournament I played golf, which automatically entered me into the drawing to come later. The prizes were awarded at intervals during the dinner and were absolutely randomly drawn. In the first drawing, I won a big screen TV. Okay, I thought that works for me. In the second drawing I won another smaller TV and a VCR, which made me a little uncomfortable as some of the other guests were looking at me suspiciously. In the third drawing I won an all-expense-paid trip to Disneyland. The evening ended amicably. Most people were drunk, but there was a certain tension in the air, and I knew that I'd hear about it on Monday. My boss had been in charge of the drawing and he knew the spot I'd been put in. I told him that I decided to keep the smaller TV and VCR, donate the large screen TV to the next event, and offer a couple who had just gotten married the trip to Disneyland. My boss heaved a sigh of relief. Story 19. I played World of Warcraft for years, but back when I was just getting started, I'm talking classic WoW, I was running a dungeon with some random people. I was in college at the time and the fire alarm started going off. I told the members in my group about the alarm and that I had to go. I quickly got up and went out for the drill. When I came back, I had a whisper message from one of the guys that was in my dungeon group. He asked what college I went to, because he also just had a fire drill. Turns out, he lived in my dorm and in the floor above me. We found out because we ended up having a random fire drill while randomly grouped together during a dungeon run. We ended up becoming really good friends and raided together for years. Story 20. From a one-horse town in NH. Moved to Florida after high school about 1,600 miles away. Was waiting table someplace and saw some guys I knew that ran a hair salon. Stopped by their table to say hi, and they introduced me to their new stylist they just hired. A girl I went to high school with from the little speck of a town I came from about 10 years earlier. Story 21. Was reading a novel in college when my roommate came home and started flipping through albums. It was the 80s. In the book I was reading, the main characters heard the song American Pie on the radio and included the lyrics, a long, long time ago, at the exact moment my roommate played that randomly selected album song on the turntable. I had been reading that book for hours, and the music synced so perfectly with the words on the page that it felt like the song was coming from the book. Story 22. When I was about 8 years old I was in the backyard playing frisbee with my older brother, my stepdad, and my grandpa. We were positioned like the corners of a square and just passing the frisbee to the person to our right. My stepdad was passing to me to my brother to my grandpa, and grandpa to stepdad. It was a fairly large backyard with no trees except around the edges. My stepdad told me to go long and threw the frisbee as hard as he could at me, but above my head so I wouldn't get hurt. I was running backwards looking at the frisbee as it approached, and right as it flew over my head I jumped up with all the might my little body could muster. I grabbed the frisbee and landed on my back. I was so thrilled I managed to catch it. I shouted out I got it triumphantly, only to realize the frisbee wasn't in my hand, but something else. My hand was fully clenched, so I sat up and opened up my hand. I literally caught out of mid-air in an open field. I cried, but everyone else thought it was hilarious. After the embarrassment faded I found it comical too. My family still brings it up at family functions. Story 23. The neighborhood I grew up in was a cul-de-sac with a big empty field behind it with a forest at the far end of the field. The field had to have been at least 150 to 200 yards from the nearest house. The house furthest at the end of the cul-de-sac had an outdoor playground for their kids, along with a cable wire that ran along the inside of the fence line. Overlooking this playground was a huge window that looked into their kitchen. Well, one day I was practicing my golf swing with a friend. I wasn't aiming towards the houses at all, but when I really connected during one shot, it sliced leftwards directly towards the giant window of the house. I just stared mortified, as the ball seemed to speed up directly towards the center of the window. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, the ball seemed to just drop out of thin air a mere feet away from the window. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, so I come closer to retrieve the ball. It was then that I noticed the ball was lying perfectly about a foot into the field from the fence line. It was then that I looked up at the cable wire. From about 150 yards away, my golf ball hit a cable wire that was no more than an inch in diameter, thankfully saving their giant window and a hearty reprimand from them and my parents. TLDR, I hit a 1-inch cable wire with a golf shot from about 150 yards away. Story 24. I played volleyball across town. I live in a metropolitan area with some friends. There was a guy there that some people knew, but me and the people I went with didn't. He was a total all day. A few weeks later, me and the friends I went with went to a restaurant closer to my side of the city. We were sitting outside eating and I was like, you guys remember that from volleyball? Well, we all started talking. All of a sudden one of my buddies was like, whoa, is that him? Sure, as he was walking past the restaurant at that very moment. There's an estimated 175 million people in my metropolitan area. Literally the 2 times I saw a specific person were at volleyball, and then at a restaurant 3 weeks later, as we started to talk about him. Story 25. I've written about this before a few times, but I am bored and boo work, so here goes. When I was maybe 5 to 6 my parents used to bring my younger sister and me to visit my great-grandmother in the nursing home. She lived in a big facility in the city, she was blind, and like 90, so I was unsurprisingly terrified of her. She'd touch our faces and talk in her barely audible voice, and I hated going, but I also hated going because her roommates scared the out of me too. She was bedridden and sort of talked nonsense. She'd basically just mumble my name while reaching out for me. My folks never really acknowledged her other than saying hello and goodbye. I don't even remember how it came up, but 20-some-odd years later I'm talking to my dad about our visits to the nursing home. I was like, what was the deal with the other old lady? Barely batting an eye, he tells me that she was actually his grandmother, who was estranged from his family and that he never really knew. I look a lot like my dad, and share his name. In her senility, she apparently thought I was my dad. The way she remembered him as a child, it was just a total coincidence that she shared a room with my mom's grandmother. I don't think either one of them knew the other, let alone were aware that they were the great matriarchs of our family just chilling out as geriatric convalescence roomies. I guess my dad thought nothing of it, having never really known her. He just laughed when I was like, do you not see how insane that is? I've never won a game of bingo in the entirety of my life. I've attended bingo nights at different campgrounds as well as at my elementary school as a kid. On top of that, the thousands of times I played in class, I have never won. Story 26. I recovered my stolen bike. First day at my new apartment. I was tired from moving and just locked it up outside. Found the cut lock the next day. 2 days later I walked down to file a police report. I waited because I knew they would never find it, so I didn't think it was important. Brought all my ownership papers and receipts I had saved since I got it new. It was a few miles from home. On the way back I saw someone ride past me on my bike in one of those real-life and slow-motion experiences. I was super lucky because he stopped and went into a store a block later so I could call the cops. Since I had just filed a report, they had a record of the theft, and I had the papers on me which the cop verified with a serial number on the bike. He said this was the most unlikely situation he had seen. They recover bikes almost never. Thieves usually aren't dumb enough to sell the bike close to where they steal it, and had never heard of someone having concrete proof of ownership on them at the scene of the arrest. Story 27 got a very aggressive breast cancer at an early age. I was 28. It had spread, told to put my affairs in order. This only happens in one of the cases after more than a year of treatment. Voil. Full remission. Every day is a blessing, so after some months in full remission I'm still kicking. My doctor says this happens in less than one of the cases. Maybe I should but a lottery ticket. Story 28. This story is from a few months ago. My manager bought 2 Coke bottles, the ones with people's names on them. He bought a Katie one cause his girlfriend's name is Katie, and he bought a random one that said Parker. I was like, Katie is a first name and Parker sounds like a last name. Wouldn't be funny if someone's name was actually Katie Parker. Literally a few minutes later a lady asked him to take a picture of his Coke bottles. She said this might sound weird, but can I take a picture of those Coke bottles? Cause that's my name. Last May I went for a walk with my girlfriend and our dog. About 1 mile into it, we heard a bunch of loud cracking sounds. Almost like gunshots. This being a rural suburb, we looked around for construction or an old car or something responsible for the sound. What we saw was a 60-foot tall oak tree on a golf course, list to the side slightly, and then completely just fall over. Someone was cutting it down was our first thought, but no one was there, no tools, no saw, no ropes, nothing. This was a 50-year-old tree that just randomly fell over one day. The leaves were still green, and when we walked up to the cracked and splintered trunk, it was literally pouring sap from it like a faucet. We couldn't get too close, as the tree was still cracking and splitting when we found the base of it, but we're still amazed at the fact that we were the only 3 witnesses to a tree falling in the middle of a huge field. It did make a sound. Story 29. I flipped a coin and it landed on its side. We had a good laugh. And I flipped it again. It landed on its side again. Another time, I was talking to a coworker about the weather, and I was like, well, at least it's not snowing. As I finished that sentence, it started to snow. I was like, that's weird. It's too warm to snow, and as soon as I finished that sentence, it stopped snowing. I then said I would hate for money to start falling from the sky, but it didn't work. Story 30. Not a sports person. Went to watch a baseball game that my neighbor's kid is in. Was the only non-regular spectator since the rest are family to the players. Very first time I was attending, right? I sit down, bend over to put my drink on the ground, and when I straightened up I got smacked in the eye with a baseball that was flying faster than the average kiddie league ball because my sports savant neighbor kid had pitched it. I can still hear the wet crunch. I was there for all of 60s. Story 31. About 8 years ago, I was in a car crash in the remote bush of Zambia. An amazing man and his wife, thanks. Clive, helped us fix up the worst of our injuries and towed our wrecked car over 160 kilometers back to the nearest town for us. After we'd got out of the hospital figuring we'd be safer sorting our wounds ourselves than trust the hygiene of this place, we wound up at a local bar next to the hostel we'd been recommended and were discussing the crash. This was a place over 100 kilometers from where we were meant to be, somewhere none of us had ever been before. We were the only white people we had seen in the town up to that point. At around 9 p.m., a middle-aged white couple come into the bar. The lady sees me, stops dead, she looks at me and walks over, reading the embroidery on my polo shirt, which was from a golf club I used to go to with my dad, back in the country he lived in. It is you, she says. Effity bleedin' Jeffity. Well, my full, actual name, what the imsu, this is David, we're your godparents. Whoa, so my godparents, who hadn't seen me since I was 6 months old, as they moved to the Caribbean, were out on safari in Malawi, and their truck broke down. They'd been towed by someone to the nearest town to get parts, which was just over the border in Zambia. They'd sorted their car, but the border crossing closed for the evening, so they had to spend the night in town, and their hotel recommended this bar as the only place serving decent food on a Monday. How did you recognize me? I asked, still shocked. Well, you look almost exactly like your father at his age, have the same voice, and the shirt just clinched it. I knew you guys lived there a few years ago, just unbelievable. If I was a religious man, I might suggest that God had sent my godparents to watch over me after the crash. Story 32. Had to travel to Europe. Cheapest flight was through Istanbul. At first everyone was like, don't go, it's dangerous, terrorist attacks happen all the time in Turkey. It did during that time. A while later people were telling me, but don't worry, it won't happen to you, you'll only be there for 10 hours, and the airport is the safest place you could be. Plane arrives, first bomb detonates, June 2016. I wasn't harmed, but the experience is still on my mind regularly. Now I don't trust those it won't happen to you. It has to happen to someone, always, right? Story 33. I was speaking to a guy while queuing for Inks's tickets in the mid-90s. Later that year my cousin got together with a guy who has the exact same name as me. His sister has the same birthday as me, and his brother was the guy behind me in the Inks's queue. Story 34. My neighbors and in-laws don't know each other. I was at my neighbors and they just came home from a cruise. They were showing us pictures of their trip, and dinner comes up. At their table are my in-laws. There's my father-in-law, being a crazy nut, with my neighbors. It's funny too, because my in-laws had mentioned that they met a nice couple on the cruise who live nearby. It turns out, nearby is directly next door to my wife and I. Story 35. Lymphoma at 19, not crazy unluckily, but still somewhere around 150,000. I also required less chemo than the standard regimen because I made lymphoma. Don't know how likely that is, but I was certainly happy to do less. I went to the ATM yesterday to take out some cash, and I got in my pile of 20s. I know some ATMs give out 10s, but now I have to file a claim with my bank and prove they owe me 15. I went into liver failure, and when we went to the hospital they also informed me I had leukemia, in one of the 4 reported cases in history and one of 2 to survive. Story 36. This will be buried. But the story is epic. In high school, my friend's parents asked me if I wanted to try skiing. Having never had enough money, I decided to give it a shot since they were kind enough to treat me. It was an absolute blast, and for years I would go with them. I had gotten quite skillful at skiing, so I wanted to give snowboarding a shot, so I devoted an entire session to learning how to snowboard. I have a longboard, so I figured it would be pretty easy to get used to. I was very wrong. I fell on my easily 75 times that day. 60% of my day was spent on the bunny hill while the rest was on the second level hill. The bunny hill was cool because you could take 2 different routes and it was a different scenic experience. Except I was just planted in the snow, couldn't feel my tailbone for months. As we packed to leave about 8 hours later, I realized that my rental locker key is gone. Every pocket is checked numerous times. That is a 75 fee to replace the key to get your stuff back. I was pissed. What a crappy way to end the day. So I throw up the Hail Mary and I say to myself, one more run down the bunny hill, maybe you'll find it. As I'm meandering down this bunny hill, looking like a fool, I wipe out once again. Mind you, by the end of the day I was actually getting the hang of it. Falls were less often and I was definitely improving. Well, wouldn't you know it, right next to my cold, sore, achy in the middle of the bunny hill right next to me, lodged in the powder, was my key. I fell at that same exact spot hours prior, and it just lodged itself there the entire day. My final clumsy run led me right back to my key and saved me 75. Needless to say, I enjoy skiing more and will stick with that from now on. I guess this story is quite literally buried. Story 37. Not me but friend were playing D&D at my house. We all just turned 18. Friend, let's call him Fred, leans over to my friend Bob and shows him nudes some chick just sent him. Bob very slowly says, "Where the did you get these?" Sounding very confused and angry. Fred says it's this girl that he met on Tinder. Bob pulls his phone, goes into his phone, and has the exact same picture on his phone. Only difference is, Fred's photo was cropped to not show her face. The girl in the picture was Bob's girlfriend, Sally. Long story short, Sally had a Tumblr where she posted pictures. This random person was catfishing Fred, happened to stumble upon Sally's blog whilst living in the same state area for Tinder to work, used her pictures to catfish Fred, who was close friends with Sally's boyfriend Bob. Confusing, I know, but we all lost our mind after we figured it out. Story 38. When I was in the 6th grade, I had a dental disease called internal absorption. It's where your tooth decays from the inside out. Was the first person in my city of 60,000 to get diagnosed with it. 2 years later, my dentist who diagnosed me with it, his nephew got it too. Story 39. My wife and I used the same ATM pin for years without knowing what the other's pin was. I kept the randomly assigned one, while she was using the last 4 of her SSN. Story 40. I was born. My dad had stage 4 lung cancer when he was 17. Doctors told him to make his goodbyes. He had about 6 months and there was nothing to be done. They cut a swath from nipple to do the biopsy in those days. He comes back 8 months later feeling fine, except he was all WF. Why am I not dead, doc? A miracle that even modern medicine still doesn't fully understand. The cancer went dormant. My dad went on to have 4 kids with his first wife. He divorced her. He then married my mom who had 3 kids. They then had me in order to pull both crews together. It boggles my mind when I think about the confluence of events that took place to make me a person. It's so weird to think about how I even exist at all. Story 41. When I finished uni, I picked up a job in a call center to earn some dollar to move to a new city, as where I studied was very much a university city with not many job prospects. The job itself was cold calling on an automated system about potential PPI claims. Yes, sorry, I was one of those people. The auto dialer had very basic information that was obviously bought from a third party, usually name and address. About 2 weeks into the job, the auto dialer picked up an area code I recognized. It was the same area code for where I grew up. I looked at the address field and recognized the address. This lady lived opposite my father's house. I could picture her face as I spoke to her. Bonus, rather than go through the entire spiel and script, it did the basic info gathering routine to see if she has a potential claim, then told her that unfortunately there's nothing we can do at this time. A few weeks later I visited my father and knocked on her door. She knew who I was but didn't recognize my voice. I told her that I cold called her at work and that she actually did have a valid claim, but I felt bad about taking a $37.5 fee from a neighbor ID known since I was a child. So I sourced some claim forms online for free and helped her fill in the forms over coffee. I didn't ask how successful the claim was, but when I saw my father for Christmas that year, the neighbor had dropped around a Christmas card for me a few weeks prior with 50 inside. That felt good. Story 42. I broke my shoulder snowboarding on the fricking bunny hill. I was teaching a friend how to board when I hit an ice patch, got an edge. Who breaks bones on the bunny hill? Story 43. I met an Irish girl a few months back. We got on well and eventually we ended up as friends. She had told me she couldn't have children because she fell from a window when she was a child and broke I don't remember what now. The thing is, we decided to have without a condom. She wasn't into the pill, for the chances of getting pregnant were really low, below 5. If I'm here you can imagine why. We managed to solve it, but I felt so betrayed by numbers I can't trust odds anymore. I feel so stupid every time I remember how easily I trusted numbers. Never again. Story 44. My mum was 40 when she had me. That means there was about a 1 in 100 chance I would have had Down syndrome. Instead, I ended up with grade 3 level of microtia. 1 in 6,000 to 12,000 people have microtia. So really it was 60-120x more likely that I'd have had Down syndrome than what I ended up with. I also had a twin that died in utero. So run the maths out, and I had a very unique time in the womb. Story 45. I went home from school and a random kid asked me who I was. For no particular reason I told him I was a wizard. He tried me by asking me to magically produce 3 walnuts. I happened to have 3 walnuts in my pocket, so I gave them to him and just walked away. Never saw the kid again.